In addition, Congresswoman Maloney is a senior member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. She is also a member of the Out of Iraq Caucus and the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Congressman Maloney.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you today. This is a very big day for me. My book came out. I just released a book on May 13th, and we had a special reading and book signing at Barnes & Noble before coming over to see you tonight. So it's called Rumors of Our Progress Are Greatly Exaggerated, Why Women's Lives Are Not Getting Any Easier. But what is happening to women in Iraq is even far more severe. We had a very big week in Congress last week, and first of all, I just want to make it very clear to all of you that I am committed to working to end the war in Iraq as soon as possible. And I am a member of the Out of Iraq Caucus, and we have tried various strategies, hearings, demonstrations, petitions, and votes on the floor of Congress. And I have repeatedly voted to end the war, to redeploy our troops, and to stop funding Bush's war. We made a very important statement on Thursday. As you know, the bill that funds the war was on the House of Representatives floor. And we wanted to make sure that everyone is on record about that war. And I compliment Congressman Obey for structuring a bill that put everyone on record on where they stood for the funding for the war, where they stood for redeployment, and where they stood for the needed unemployment benefits and other funding that we needed in the supplemental. We wanted to make sure that people could not hide their positions by voting for a single package and then say, well, you know, I really wanted to vote for those GI benefits, but I was opposed to the war. We made it very clear. We separated each point out in a separate vote to put people on record. Thursday's bill was taken up in 3 separate votes: funding for the war, timetable for withdrawal, and funding for domestic priorities such as the new GI Bill for returning veterans, paying for the census, extending unemployment benefits. I voted against the funding for the war, and usually we don't have the votes because all of the Republicans vote for it, and our caucus, the Democratic caucus, is split. It's divided. But we won. We didn't expect to win, but we won. But we do not believe that it will survive the Senate. The amendment failed 149 to 141, and 132 Republicans voted present. That's why it failed. They just did not take a vote. But I can tell you that what we're doing in the Senate, a lot of our initiatives are failing in the Senate. I serve on the Financial Services Committee, as he noted, and we have sent to the Senate well over 50 bills. Only 2 have come back. So what we send to the Senate usually does not survive. Most Democrats view this action as a tactic to give the Republicans a chance to campaign on the platform that a majority of Democrats do not support the troops. I think that is a very strong losing strategy. Most Americans do not support this war. Most people agree that we are supporting the troops by voting to end funding for the war and to bring our veterans home to their families. It is the Bush administration that does not support the troops. And the Bush administration's only withdrawal plan is for him to leave office. They refuse to talk about any alteration in their policy. The Bush administration sent this government on a wild goose chase for weapons of mass destruction that don't exist. And they got us in the middle of an unending conflict in a country that is divided against itself. America should get out of the crossfire. We're only making things worse by providing a target that all sides can agree on to hate, and causing great destruction in the process, as the previous speaker pointed out, to families and children. I also voted for the second provision to redeploy our troops within 30 days of the bill's enactment, with the goal of completing withdrawal of all combat troops by December 2009, and that passed by a vote of 227 to 196. And finally, I supported in support of the third provision, which had necessary funding to provide Iraq and Afghan veterans with a new GI Bill. This GI Bill is not as generous as the one that my father had when he fought in World War II, but it does have employment, it does have health care, it does have education. It also, we passed an extension of unemployment benefits, which is very important because many Americans are losing their jobs in this recession. And it did provide money for the census, which is important, because if we don't get an accurate count, then we don't have accurate representation and we don't have accurate funding formulas. And the Republicans have made a mess of the census along with the economy, along with the war, and many other areas. And this bill, the one that we voted on Thursday, represents the strongest statement Congress has ever made about the need to end the war now. And I hope it survives the Senate intact, and I hope the President will sign it. Dream on! But you can hope. One of the issues that I have been most concerned about has been the precarious state of Iraqi women. When the Iraqis were drafting their constitution, I urged the State Department, along with the Women's Caucus in Congress, to focus on the need to ensure that Iraqi women were included in the Constitution. Incidentally, American women are not in our Constitution, but we were fighting to get the Iraqi women in the Constitution. And I warned against the risk that Islamic law, Sharia, would be embedded in their Constitution. Sharia-based legal decisions on an interpretation of the Quran that disadvantages women and children in many situations, particularly when it comes to family law. Prior to the first Gulf War, Iraq was one of the most permissive Islamic nations in the Middle East when it came to women's rights. Following the war, Saddam Hussein allowed a shift toward observance of Sharia, and he gave tribal leaders freedom to act upon traditional tribal codes. In 1990, Saddam Hussein added language in the Iraqi Penal Code that exempted men from punishment for the practice of honor killings. That gave men the right to kill female relatives who had committed or been involved in perceived sexual improprieties, even if the women were raped. In 2002, the UN Special Report on Violence Against Women reported that over 4,000 Iraqi women had been killed for hurting their family's reputation. The Congressional Research Service reports that a trend of decreasing literacy has been reported by the Iraqi government during the 1990s. And in 2000, the United Nations estimated that adult illiteracy among Iraqi women was approximately 45%, an increase from a reported 25% illiteracy rate in 1987. Another stark example of how this war is hurting women and families. Since the U.S. invasion into Iraq, Congress has allocated significant sums that specifically help Iraqi women with democratic organization, education, advocacy, and entrepreneurship. When the Iraq Constitution was being drafted, I urged the State Department to advocate for a provision requiring equal protection for men and women. I arranged for Beate Surate Gordon, the woman responsible for inserting language in the Japanese Constitution that enabled women to gain rights after World War II. I urged her to testify and arranged for her to come and meet with leaders in Congress. Although she is not particularly well known in the United States, she has been called one of the world's most influential women for the extraordinary impact she's had in securing equal rights for Japanese women. I hoped our government might remember her example and insist that some of these clauses be included in the new Constitution. The original language of the draft was very harsh. It said Islam was the source of law. That was amended after a huge outcry by women to say that Islam is a fundamental source of law. It may be a small distinction, but it's a very important one. There's other troublesome language as well. The Constitution prohibits Parliament from passing laws that contradict the established laws of Islam. Nonetheless, there's also language that's good. The new Constitution forbids discrimination on gender or ethnic grounds and prohibits legislation that contravenes human rights law. We need to pay attention, though, to what's happening to Iraqi women and make sure that it's well known. And we know that bad things are starting to happen. CNN reported in February that in Basra, a stronghold of conservative Shia groups, as many as 133 women were killed in Basra last year, 79 for violations of Islamic teachings, and 47 for so-called honor killings. There was a sign in red paint just outside the main downtown market that read, "We warn against not wearing a headscarf and wearing makeup. Those who do not abide by this will be punished. God is our witness. We have notified you." And this is really terrible, but more than any statistic, we were meeting with Iraqi women. They were coming to our country, and we had the opportunity to meet with many of them. At the beginning, they were very strong and outspoken and very optimistic about building a democracy. In the end, they were telling us, please don't mention my name. Don't let anyone know I talked to you. I was a judge. They demonstrated outside my court. I can no longer practice. I was a nurse. I was a doctor. I can no longer practice. They are really rolling back women's rights and women's participation in their society to a dramatic degree. And all reports show from the United Nations and everywhere that when you empower women and when you empower families, that it increases the strength of the village, the strength of the family, the strength of the opportunities for the children. So there are many, many tragedies in Iraq, one of which was graphically shown in the photographs by the prior speaker, but in the stories that we have heard from the women in Iraq, it's just blood-curdling how they have lost their wings, lost their position. And unlike many countries like Afghanistan and others, women were strong participating members in their society, educated and strong. Yet this has been turned over on its back with the Sharia law and along with the others great tragedies that are taking place in Iraq. I join you in your commitment and compliment you for your leadership in really holding members of Congress, press, the communities accountable on keeping a strong eye on what's happening in Iraq and making it a focus of the United States government to bring our troops home. We tried many, many times on the floor of Congress, and I see many faces of many friends of mine who said, why can't you stop this war? Why can't you? We're a democracy, we depend on votes. And we have failed every single time except for this Thursday. And quite frankly, when we went to the floor, we didn't know how our colleagues on the other side of the aisle were going to vote. But when it passed, or rather it failed, the funding failed, our goal passed, we were just ecstatic. One of my good friends, Lynn Woolsey, has been one of the prime leaders in the Get Out of Iraq caucus. She deserves the gratitude of all of us, along with Barbara Lee. They have really been the prime leaders in our caucus for keeping the attention on this issue. Practically every single week they organize some type of meeting or some type of outcry or some type of focus to keep our attention on this important issue. Let me tell you that it is always a pleasure for me to be at 1199 for many of the progressive causes and meetings that we've been here to advance, primarily health care. They've been a union that has been very concerned about the fact that 45 million people in America no longer have health care and that the number is growing, yet another reason to elect a Democratic president. And I must say how thrilling we were in Congress last week when we picked up yet another House seat in Mississippi, of all places, Mississippi. And we won 3 special elections. It's the first time that's happened in 30 years in this country. And I think that there is a shift against the Republican leadership, not only for the war in Iraq, but for their failed economic policies and their failed health care policies and their failed environmental policies. And so I would say that definitely under their administration, rumors of our progress has been greatly exaggerated. And it is definitely time for a change, and never underestimate the ability of one person or one organization to bring great change in our society. So thank you for having me here today. And I'd be willing to take questions if that's appropriate. Hi, Ruth.